As was mentioned by Mr. Garrett, the feast is upon us. 5 days till the Feast of Trumpets begins. This upcoming Wednesday night, we begin the first day of the 7th month in the Hebrew calendar. And in 2.5 weeks, basically, we're at the opening night of the Feast of Tabernacles, 2017. It is amazing when you think about it that we're going to go there and we're going to spend 10% of our annual income. Boom! Just lay it all out in basically a week. You ever talk with folks? I do this sometimes. I've got some guys that I play pickleball with on Tuesday nights, late at night, and every now, as we roll around to feast time, I've got to tell them, well, I'm not going to be able to be here. I've got a church festival that we're keeping. And sometimes they ask questions, what do you mean church festival? So sometimes I'll kind of, if they really are inquisitive, I'll start to talk with them a little bit about it. And I'll say, yeah, we do this. This is in Scripture, and it's this time of year, and we spend 10% of our income in a week. And I just look at them. And you just see the numbers cranking up, and they're thinking, whoa. I said, yes, it is a very enjoyable time. But it's hard for folks to imagine that we would do something like that, yet it is, I'll talk with them, and again, depending on their inquisitive nature, I'll talk with them about the meaning of the feast and how we use our funds to come before God and worship Him and enjoy this abundance as a foretaste of what is to come when Christ returns and sets up his government here on earth. They are fascinated when they realize that much money is spent on that, and I tell them that's what it says to do. That's what God says to do. That's why we do it, and it is a wonderful time. So in that light, as we're approaching this fall festival season, I thought it would be appropriate to title the message in this manner: 3 ways to experience a mediocre and unfulfilling fall festival season. Brethren, I can almost guarantee you that if you will apply at least one of these principles, and I would submit to you that many of us have applied them in the past, that there is a very strong likelihood that you will be able to experience a mediocre and unfulfilling feast season. Are you interested? Let's talk about them today. Because obviously we want to do just the opposite. Our opportunity to experience the Feast of Tabernacles and to experience this fall festival season, of course, happens one time a year, one season a year to do this. And some do these characteristics nearly every year. Many of us do not. Many of us sometimes allow some of these to come in. Points 1 and 2 are somewhat subtle. Point 3 is very obvious. And I think probably most of us are already thinking about at least point number 3, a way to have a very mediocre and unfulfilling feast. But let's talk about this first one. The first one today, the best way for me to explain it is by using a sports analogy. Those of you that are sports people, this is something that I have done, that I am trying to do less of, going into a game or an activity that I'm about to play. And it's this. It's a pregame kind of activity. Before you go into the sport, be it what I like to play, pickleball or basketball or golf or whatever the situation is, bowling or whatever. But as you go into the activity, you're already thinking of all the things that are going to hinder you or hamper you slightly going into it. For me, it would be, say, for instance, one place where I play pickleball in Frisco. There's a gym there. It's a nice gym, but there's a certain kind of similar to here, but it goes across horizontally, windows that are at the top of the gym. And at a certain time of day, if you're on the certain side of the court, that light comes in and hits your eyes. So as soon as you turn to the side to see my partner getting ready to hit the ball, I'm blinded by the light. wrapped up like a deuce, roller, no, not but I'm blinded by the light, and then I'm trying to focus, and I can't. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm playing on this court, and then I'll make some comment like, oh, yeah, the light's working well for us. And so what I'm doing is this concept of what we would call self-handicapping. Self-handicapping. If you want to set yourself up for a mediocre and unfulfilling Feast of Tabernacles, self-handicap. Do that going into the feast. You set things up in such a way that if you fail and if it doesn't go well, I mean, I told you it was this and this and this. The court's a little too slippery. The air conditioner where we're playing is blowing so hard that this little plastic wiffle ball that I'm hitting comes at me in a weird way, so I'm not able to strike the ball. So all of these things are working against me. So the likelihood is that my teammate and I are not going to be successful against our opponents. The self-handicap rule. And in contrast, we can set this up in our minds to where I've set it up with all these things working against me and everything and everything in my environment working against me. It'll be almost a miracle if I win. It'll be an incredible feat that I've accomplished if I am able to win. Thinking about the situation in our lives and thinking about going into the feast, do we ever self-handicap? Are you a self-handicapper? So what I'm getting at is making excuses before the event or the situation, thinking that things will not go well. I.e., let's go through some here. We weren't able to get all that good of a place this year. In fact, it's kind of a bit of a dump. But here we are. We're going to be here. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But compared to the places where we've been before, this is really not what we'd like it to be. So it's not really setting up well for a good feast. We wanted to be able to get there at least 2 days before to settle in, but because of school and because of this, we're only able to leave the day of the feast when it's starting that night. So we're not going to get the chance to settle in. We'll see if we can make it to services, but I'm going to be exhausted. We're self-handicapping ourselves already going into the feast. I saw the speaking list, and you know what? They're really not my favorite set of speakers who are speaking this feast. I'll try to make the best of it. Do we ever do that? Do we ever do that? We don't really know anyone who's going to the site where we are. Probably going to be a fairly lonely feast this year. I lost my job halfway through the year, was in between jobs for a bit, so our income is quite a bit down. We're really low on our second tithe. Really not in a position to do that well this feast. McDonald's, if I don't get the special family meal deal, if I can't afford that, but if I get the dollar menu, I might, we may be able to eke out getting some food down our gullet this week. It's going to be a rough week this week because we haven't been able to even find a decent grocery store here that has the kind of feast foods. I mean, feast-worthy kinds of foods that we like to have at the feast. I mean, come on. We eat this kind of cheese, and they don't even have that at Joe's Country Hardware and Bait Shop and grocery store, out in the middle of nowhere. All the things that can happen sometimes, we self-handicap. And what happens is a self-handicapping approach leads to self-fulfilling prophecies with folks. So think about in life, do you or I tend to be self-handicappers, going into services, going into a situation at work, going into any aspect of life? Do we tend to be self-handicappers? Because it does lead to mediocrity. It does lead to unfulfillment. I watched if you would, let's turn to Matthew 25 to begin. I watched a tennis match, the end of a tennis match back in the spring. I think it was the Miami Open. I really love to watch Roger Federer. Roger Federer is just one of my favorite athletes to watch. incredible tennis player, and he's so old. He's ancient, and he's 35. He's just ancient, and he's still an incredible tennis player, playing, in fact, in many respects at the top of his game. But there was a match going, I think it was the semifinal match at the Miami Open. Of course, those are only 3-set matches, but he was playing against Nick Kyrgios, I believe is the fellow's name, out of Australia. But because Roger's been around, especially in the U.S., he is very popular, and a lot of folks cheer for him. So a lot of times in these kinds of matches, most of the crowd would be cheering for Roger. Well, this Nick is known as a bit of a hothead, but an incredible tennis athlete. And he was holding his own. Roger eked out the first set, so it's best of 3. So they're in the middle of the second set, and things start happening. There was a person that kind of yelled out one time, and he got upset that the fact that the person yelled, and he yelled back at the guy in the crowd, and the main judge was trying to cool him down. But you could see him just kind of starting to slip, and in his mind making excuses for himself. They were in the tiebreaker of that set, in the tiebreak set, and it was 5-5. And there was a situation where Roger returned a shot and hit it, and he mishit it, and it was going deep. And somebody in the crowd, and of course if it hits the line, it's in, but somebody in the crowd, right as the ball was just about to hit the line, somebody in the crowd yelled, "Out!" Well, that's also the call that the line judge makes. But, obviously it threw Nick off, and it could have been a person that was cheering for Nick that was thinking, "Oh, it's going out," and yells "out." Of course, he thought it was an out call, so he didn't focus on his shot, and he hit an errant shot, and then, of course, the play would continue because it was in. So he was really, really upset. He messed up his shot, and then he looked at the person in the crowd and just started screaming at the guy in the crowd, started cussing at him, and you could just see everything fell apart. He began, and he already had shown some of that, he began this self-handicapping. Everything's against me. I've got this against me, I got this against me, I've got this against me. I don't see how this can work out. And it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. He did lose, and it was actually quite a bad mark on that individual for the way that he handled himself. And again, I'm not going to say that Mr. Federer has always behaved himself in every situation appropriately in athletics, nor am I going to say that I have done that perfectly in every situation. We're all working. That's one of the, working on things such as that. That's one of the beauty of sports. It does teach much about things in our character which we need to work on. Matthew 25 speaks to this. Matthew 25, verse 24. Here is a person, we know this story well, here is a person who's self-handicapped. Is God into seeing us self-handicapped? I'm going to give you all the reasons why I can't do this well. How did God deal with Moses when Moses started saying, I stumble when I speak, and how are they going to recognize me when I go to them? God finally got very upset. Righteous indignation against Moses for this. Moses, who made your mouth? I made your mouth. I can take care of business here. Get on with it. God is not up for self-handicapping. We see a person in the parable of the talents who's self-handicapped. We know the story. He was given his one talent, and we see it play out here in verse 24. So then he who had received the one talent came and said, here comes the self-handicap. Lord, I knew you were to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown. See, what do I have? What can I do here? Everything's against me. I can't really make this into a good situation because of this. And you reap where you don't even sow. You gather where you haven't scattered seed. I was fearful as a result, verse 25, and hid your talent in the ground. Here you go. Take it back. How does God view that? How does God view that? Of course, this is the parable of the master or the Lord of the one who gave out the talents to his servants. And by extension, we look at our lives. God, who is a God of perfection, a God of love, a God of perfect grace and perfect mercy who has given us so much. How does God view that if we handicap ourselves or self-handicap? His Lord answered and said, "You wicked and lazy servant. You knew that I reap where I haven't sown and gather where I haven't scattered seed. You ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming at least I would have gotten some interest out of it." Verse 28, "Therefore, so take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. That is how God operates. God sees us and sees what he's given us and wants us to recognize what he's given us and not self-handicap, but to say, this is what I've been given. This is how I've been blessed. So I need to be incredibly grateful for that and go forward in a positive attitude with all my effort and ask God to bless my efforts as I serve him. And he says, so because a person who has, more will be given. That is a godly principle, not what we see in the world. That's not what we see in what folks say should be done for people. Everyone who has, more will be given him, and he will have abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. Deuteronomy 14:26. We'll be turning to this scripture multiple times during these upcoming feasts, but Deuteronomy 14:26 speaks to a do not handicap yourself situation. Deuteronomy 14, verse 26, he says here, breaking into the thought with respect to keeping the Feast of Tabernacles, spend that money for whatever your heart desires. Enjoy it. Enjoy the oxen. Enjoy the sheep. For yayin, fermented wine, and or similar drink, or shekar, a stronger kind of wine. Whatever your heart desires, enjoy that. Eat there before the Lord your God, and you shall rejoice, you and your household. You shall rejoice. Well, but I got this thing going on, and we're going to get to the feast late, and man, I got flies. Some flies are coming into my room. I'm dealing with flies. This is going to ruin my feast. I'm dealing with this. I'm dealing with this. I'm dealing with the AC issues. Why can't they keep the AC cool enough in this hall? I mean, we pay these folks good money. This is ruining my feast. No, he says, you shall rejoice. We are coming before God's presence, and he wants us to rejoice. No handicapping. One of the things that I was impressed by, as I think I told you last fall, I think I told you what happened, but I didn't tell you how much it impacted me. But our son-in-law, on the day that the feast was supposed to begin that night, was walking, and they were going on a hike that afternoon. They had a place that they wanted to see that was along the coast. He slipped on a slippery place on the rock and fell about 4 or 5, 6 feet and landed right on his knee, and didn't realize it at the time, but actually broke his knee. So he went the entire feast. It was actually his femur that broke, but went the entire feast with a broken leg and didn't know it. But was in went from having all these plans about what they were going to do for the feast, but then all of a sudden he's in a wheelchair. He's got this splint on his leg all feast, and I was just thinking, oh man, this is going to be a rough feast for Kelly. But at the end of it, he said, I had a fantastic feast. It was a great feast. And he got to eat his fish and chips, which he loved. He got to see his wife finally serve him like she needed to, with everything and moving him. No, I'm kidding. Stacy always serves Kelly. But he approached it from the viewpoint not of, oh, this is going to be a handicapping situation. And he was physically handicapped that entire feast. But it's how we view it. Let's look at an opposite view of this Matthew 25 situation in 1 Samuel 13. 1 Samuel 13 speaks to that. You talk about a handicapping situation for Israel. This is pretty telling here in terms of dealing with the Philistines and battles that were about ready to take place. I'm trying to imagine going into battle in this kind of a situation. 1 Samuel 13, verse 16. 1 Samuel 13, 16. Saul, Jonathan his son, and the people present with them remained in Gibeah of Benjamin. But the Philistines encamped in Michmash. Verse 17, then raiders came out of the camp of the Philistines in 3 companies. One company turned onto the road at Ophrah to the land of Shual. Verse 18, another company turned to the road to Beth-horon, and another company turned to the road of the border that overlooks the valley of Zeboim toward the wilderness. Verse 19, now listen to this. This is seriously handicapping. There was no blacksmith to be found throughout all the land of Israel. For the Philistines said, lest the Hebrews make swords and spears. So something happened in that to where either the Philistines were plaguing them in these areas to where they thwarted all attempts at having blacksmiths, but the blacksmiths were not around, were not available to do the kinds of things that you would need to do. The blacksmiths are the ones that make swords and spears. But all the Israelites, verse 20, would go down to the Philistines to sharpen each man's plowshare, his mattock, his axe, and his sickle. So that's what they had to do battle with. They had to grab, I got this plowshare over here, sharpen this thing, see how I can use that in battle, versus a sword or a spear. So it says, and the charge for sharpening was a pim. Can you imagine paying a pim for paying that much for a plowshare? I can't. I have no idea what a pim was worth. But anyway, it's about 2/3 shekel weight, whatever that is. So, but it was very expensive, I'm thinking, as we read this. So the mattocks, the forks, got to have the forks, the pitchforks to do battle with the axes, to set the points of the goads. So verse 22, it came about on the day of battle that there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any of the people who were with Saul and Jonathan, but they were found with Saul and Jonathan his son. So we're going to battle and we have 2 swords. Here we go, 2 swords as they go into battle. That is slightly handicapping for them. But we see the story as this plays out. It happened, they're getting ready to go up. So verse 23, so the garrison of the Philistines went out to the pass of Michmash. So it happened one day that Jonathan, Saul's son, said to his armor bearer, come, let's go over to this Philistine garrison that's on the other side. Jonathan didn't tell his father about it. Verse 2, Saul was sitting on the outskirts of Gibeah under a pomegranate tree, which is in Migron. The people who were with him were about 600 men. So they, including Eli, Phinehas, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli. This was actually Ahijah. He had the ephod that he was wearing, but the people didn't know that Jonathan had taken off to do this. Verse 4, between the passes by which Jonathan sought to go over to the Philistine garrison, there was this sharp rock on one side and a sharp rock on the other side, and the name of one was Bozez, and the name of the other Sina. Verse 5, the front of one faced northward opposite Michmash and the other southward opposite Gibeah. So here's this statement, and those of you that know this story know that this is the amazing thing that Jonathan said here. Verse 6, Jonathan said to the young man who bore his armor, come, let us go over to this garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for nothing restrains the Lord from saving by many or by few. And then his armor bearer said, well, do all that's in your heart. Go then, here I am with you, according to your heart. Jonathan said, so very well, let us cross over to these men, and we will show ourselves to them. And then they wait for a sign to see if they should do battle. It'll be a note from God that they will be delivered into their hand. And here they came out. And it says, where is this, where this battle... So it says, so the first slaughter which verse 14, which Jonathan and his armor bearer made was about 20 men within about half an acre of land. So here's this one guy with a sword that's got his armor bearer beside him that doesn't have a sword, that's going up and fighting these 20 guys over this, there was a cleft there, but he was fighting over this half acre of land and doing battle. And it's just amazing that he did not allow any concern in that way to handicap whether or not God would be with them and leading them into what they were to face. Tremendous confidence in God and tremendous confidence in God's way of life and how God's way of life was to be lived, how God was working with Israel, and how this nation was this way that was against God. So what do we have to fear? Let's go forward and do this. What do we have to handicap us? We have God, the God of Israel, guiding and directing us. Of course, we think about that spiritually. Our battles now are not physical, they're spiritual. Do we think of all of our handicaps, or do we think of who is on our side in helping us battle, as Mr. Beach was talking about, this incredible force that has the whole world in his sway? God gives us that. There's no fear to be had. There's no handicapping situation as God is for us. You think about that approach that he took, and how this attitude of I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, versus I'm handicapped in this way, I'm handicapped in this way, I'm handicapped in this way, I really don't know what I can do. How much of a difference that makes. Imagine David and Goliath. Here David's going up to go against Goliath, and he sees, ooh, the wind's picking up here. I've got this sling, and I've got these little pebbles, and I can't get too close to this guy. So with the wind kicking up, how am I going to factor in? Look at this guy's armor. He's got armor here, 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 and here, and I'm not wearing any armor. They didn't even have any armor my size. I wouldn't have been able to move if I didn't have the armor. So here I am, defenseless, and I've got this little sling, and I'm trying to throw this little pebble somewhere on him, on his high-end Sears and Roebuck Superstar armor I have nothing, and I'm going at him. And actually, you know what? My hamstring's a little tight. I'm going in, and I'm feeling a little tight. And actually, I don't think the wind is going to impact his weaver's beam. That's, this humongous thing that weighs 60, 70 pounds or whatever, as he's throwing it 10 yards away from me. I don't think the wind's going to affect that. So I don't know what's going to happen here. No, he ran to meet him. He ran to meet him. What handicaps are there when God is on your side? Does it not figure that here these two individuals, David and Jonathan, became knit together as brothers? Because they both had that heart. As they began to get to know each other later, they began to realize that heart and that confidence in following God fully and seeing that nothing handicaps us as we completely lean to God for guidance and direction. What things do we take to the feast, or what concepts do we take, or what mindset do we have going into the feast that can self-handicap us? Is there any? I just ask us as God's people this feast. Let's go over to Romans 8. We can't cover this without going to Romans 8. But just ask us to consider, if you tend to be a self-handicapper, catch yourself this feast. As we're getting ready to go into the feast, catch yourself and say, I am not going to go down that path, because that hinders. It becomes self-fulfilling prophecies. It becomes to where all of a sudden it's a miracle if I have a good feast. Oh, come on. It's not supposed to be a miracle. It's supposed to happen. It's supposed to happen because God is in this feast. He is in this feast, and His joy is in this feast. As we yield to God and completely go forward in confidence in Him, there is nothing that we should allow to handicap us in that regard towards experiencing a very meaningful feast. Romans 8, verse 31. Romans 8, verse 31, as we just said, if God be for us, who can be against us? Who can be against us when God's for us? Verse 32, He who did not spare His own Son. God the Father didn't spare His own Son, but He delivered His Son up for all of us. How shall we not with Him also, how shall He not with Him also freely give us all things? That awaits us. So then who's going to bring a charge against God's elect? God justifies. God has justified us. Who's he who condemns? It's Christ who died and furthermore is also risen. He's the one who's at the right hand of God, who makes intercession for us. So who is it that's going to separate us from the love of Christ? Will this thing, this tribulation here, this distress here, this persecution, this famine, this nakedness, this peril, this sword? No, we know that our life is filled with challenges. We're killed all the day long, but we focus on the fact of verse 37 that in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. There is no handicapping there. He said, because of that, I'm persuaded that none of these things, death, life, angels, principalities, powers, things present, things to come, height, depth, nor any created thing, none of these things are going to be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. As we go into these upcoming feast days, think on those things. Think on those things, because only our own self-handicapping can hijack whether we choose to rejoice during the fall feast season, culminating with the Feast of Tabernacles in the last great day. Only our own self-handicapping. This second one I picked up from Dennis Prager's book that I've read off and on or quoted to you occasionally, called Happiness is a Serious Problem, that I think especially applies not only as we keep the feast this year, but nearly in every aspect of our lives. And it's an approach to follow if we want to experience a mediocre and unfulfilling feast. It is this. Now, I want you to think about this, and don't jump to a conclusion of whether or not you agree with it until we have a chance to explain this concept. But it has some caveats to it, and it has some exceptions. But let me make this statement. It is a subtle one, but it is very critical if you want to have a mediocre and unfulfilling feast. So that is this. If you want to have that, increase your expectations versus minimizing them this feast. Do you agree with that statement? If you or I increase our expectations of what we expect to happen at the feast versus minimizing our expectations, if we increase them, we are probably going to have a much more mediocre and unfulfilling feast. Could having high expectations affect our feast negatively? I submit to you, most certainly yes. And let's talk about that. In order to talk about that, we need to define some terms. I'm not talking about desires, things that we would love to do this feast, that we plan for. I'm not talking about that when we say expectations. I'm not talking about right types of ambitions, things that we want to achieve and do if we can. I'm not talking about goals for the feast. We've got these goals as a family that we want to do this feast. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about visualization in terms of seeing what the feast pictures, of seeing how we want to keep the feast, to picture this. I'm not talking about visualization. I'm not talking about optimism, except there's an aspect of that I do want to discuss. I'm not talking about anticipation. I'm talking about expectation. I'm not talking about hope and hopefulness that we'll have a wonderful feast. I'm talking about expectations. So to get to that definition of expectation, let's first look at optimism. There are two basic definitions that Prager brings out in his book that I think, again, is very pertinent to what we're talking about today. One is this: to dwell on the most hopeful aspects of a situation. Do you tend to be an optimistic person, where you or I tend to, as best we can, we strive to dwell on the most hopeful aspects of a situation? Is there anything wrong with that? I don't think so. Some people would say, well, I'm more of a realist than I am an optimist. Okay, that's fine. But to be an optimist and say, in this situation, I'm going to dwell on the more hopeful aspects of a situation, nothing wrong with that. But this second definition of optimism is problematic, and it leads into what we want to get into with expectations, causing us to have a mediocre or unfulfilling feast. Okay, second definition of optimism: a tendency to expect the best possible outcome. A tendency to expect the best possible outcome. As I go into a situation, it's not I'm hopeful, but I expect it. I expect the best possible outcome will occur. Now, sometimes people in sales say, hey man, you're really starting to trample into my business. If I don't think I'm going to make this sale, if I don't know that I'm going to make this sale, if I don't go into this and my manager says, you've got to go into it knowing, expecting to make the sale, alternate choicing them. Do you want to sign for this or do you want to sign for this? Not do you want to do it. It's an expectation. You've got to go into that. Well, okay, I would say this to that. How many of you salesmen close every single deal you go in for? How many? It doesn't happen. So I'm not saying not to be hopeful or not to set things in place, but to expect this to happen is problematic. Because what tends to happen when we have expectations is we do this. We tend to take for granted something will happen or regarding something as virtually inevitable. That's what I'm getting into with the situation of expectations. Do you tend to go into feasts? Have you tended to go into your marriage? Have you tended to go into a job, into this or that with an expectation that it will be this way? What tends to happen when we expect something and it doesn't happen? Two things happen, and we'll talk about that. But this thing of expectations, that's what I'm saying is dangerous. Taking for granted that something will happen regarding whatever is about to happen. I take for granted that it will happen. I expect it. I expect the place where we'll be staying this feast to be as it should be. I expect the hall to be the perfect temperature, the seating perfect for every situation, the sound system perfect without a hitch. I expect that as one of God's people. If we do this right, it should be this way, and it must be this way, and I go in expecting that it will be the case. I expect every message and every special music to be incredible. It's going to blow me away. I expect it to be that way. I expect the food where I eat to be exquisite. If I go to this restaurant at this feast and pay this amount of money, I expect this kind of service and I expect this kind of food because that's the way it should be. I take it for granted that should be the minimum of what should happen when I go there. I expect the trip to be absent of any complications. I expect my luggage to arrive with my flight. I expect that to happen. I expect my children to behave perfectly and set an incredibly positive example in every circumstance with every single brethren. Whether or not they're pinching me them in the face or whatever, they're going to be perfect in every way. I expect all the brethren to be at their best in every circumstance. I expect the weather to behave according to how it is forecasted this feast. In everyday life, expectations. I expect to be alive when Christ returns versus in the grave to be raised up. Some people have had that expectation. What happens when that expectation is not realized? I expect to be making this amount of money by this time in my life and living in this kind of a house with these kinds of people in this kind of a neighborhood. I expect to be married someday. I expect to have children and the number of children that I want. I expect to be in good health tomorrow. Do you expect to be in good health tomorrow? Let's talk about that because that's a good way to explain the difference. It is versus being thankful for being in good health today. Today I woke up, I have back pain sometimes. Today I woke up, I was free of back pain. Preached in Sherman, stood around. Sherman has the extra thick carpet. I've got gels in my, I'm gelling like a felon, or however they say it, gelling like Magellan, whatever the phrase is. But I've got gels on today, so I feel good even on this hard floor. My back feels great. I expect for my back to be in great shape tomorrow. Is that the way that I should approach my day for tomorrow? Or should I say, I am really thankful that my back feels great today? And I'm thankful to God for that. And I hope that my back is feeling pretty good tomorrow. And I'll pray about it and ask for God to help me with that. But you see the difference? Because when I expect my back to be healthy tomorrow, I am disappointed when it is not. The expectations lead to disappointment. Now let's turn to Luke 14. You hear, I think one of the best ways to explain this of expectations is in the sports world. Those of you that watch sports, you'll see, the Super Bowl, the pinnacle game, and to win the Super Bowl is the incredible victory. To win the BCS championship in college football, to win the World Cup, to win the World Series, and we'll say the NCAA tournament. It used to be 64 teams. Now there are a few more teams that play in to get to the 64, but 64 teams, a single elimination tournament gets down to where in the end there is only one that wins. And then they go into the locker room and they talk to this team, that just won the national championship. And you don't always hear this, but sometimes you hear this situation where a guy will say, well, we just believed in ourselves, man. We believed in ourselves. We started at the very beginning, practice day one before season even starts. We got together as a team and we said, we're going to the national championship and we're going to win it all. You got to believe. We believed. And look at us now. We are here. Everyone never expected anything less but to be here and to win, and here we are. Because we saw it, we believed it, we expected it, and it is there. And, they always love to film that, and you think, man, what great vision, and this and that. This expectation of this victory. So then we say, well, okay, what about the other 63 teams? Are they all miserable failures? If they all expected in day one to win it all, so then everybody else is disappointed. They're failures. They didn't achieve what they expected to be. It's unrealistic. It's not reality. The disadvantages of having high expectations going into a thing, be it an activity, this trip, this excursion, this function here, this service here, this event, this experience, the disadvantages are twofold. One, as we already said, it leads to disappointment. It leads to diminished happiness when our expectations are not met. Well, I was expecting that this and this would happen. Honey, I was expecting we were going to do this and this and this, and then this didn't happen. I'm disappointed. Or this didn't happen and this happened. I thought we were going to have this kind of day, and I thought we were going to be able to do this and this and this, and then womp, womp, womp. It didn't happen. So Debbie Downer or Donnie Downer hits. Luke 14, verse 7. Luke 14, verse 7. High expectations, seeing ourselves as this is the way it is, only when those are not met lead to disappointments. Luke 14, verse 7. Luke 14, verse 7. We know the story here. It's about taking the lowly place. Many things that we can draw from this passage, but I'm going to draw this. So he told a parable to those who were invited when he noted how they chose the best places, saying to them, when you're invited by anyone to a wedding feast, don't sit down in the best place. I am of this status. I expect to be treated in this way, so I'm going to go to this position because I should be fairly close to the person at the head table because of my status. Realistically, this is my status, so I'm going to go here. There is an expectation that is there. And as we know here, the person is womp, womp, womp. As the person says, lest one more honorable than you be invited by him. And verse 9, and he who invited him comes and says to you, oh, give place to this man, and then you begin with shame to take the lowest place, down and down and down. No, go into it without expectations. Go into it humbly. I don't have control over this situation, so I'm going to go into it humbly. Verse 10, when you're invited, go and sit in the lowest place. See that he who invited you comes and says, oh, friend, come up higher. Then you will have glory in the presence of those who sit at the table with you. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Another concept with this thing of expectations is high expectations. Think about this. High expectations undermine gratitude when expectations are met. When the expectation that we have is what it is, then we're not as thankful for it because we expected that, versus deeply appreciating the experience in that. It undermines gratitude. Gratitude, brethren, is the key to happiness. If you are a person who struggles with happiness, I would submit that most times at the core of that problem is a lack of gratitude. It's a lack of thankfulness. Christianity 101, and that's Christianity 555. That's master's level and it's basic level. But it is such a truism that gratitude and thankfulness is the key to happiness. I've struggled with this. I've seen this in my own life, times when I have certain expectations, expecting it to be this way, and then it is, and I don't appreciate it as much as I should. What a wonderful blessing. Here we are in America where actually, going to the feast is for many is actually a bit of a challenge. It's a bit of a step down than from what many of us experience in the creature comforts at home. The food that we have, the type of bed, the setting of the air of the mattress, the coolness of the mattress, the air temperature that we have in our room, the certain type of treat that we have at this time of day, and this kind of treat that we have here, and this and that. It's not that way for everybody, but many experience incredible kinds of blessings day in and day out in our homes, so that the feast, in terms of some of those physical kinds of things, in some ways can be a bit more of a challenge for us. It's interesting how that can be. But again, I submit to you that if we live a life that has these expectancies here, we tend to be disappointed when we get into a situation where it's not quite like up to our standards, versus coming in from the standpoint that we should. I had a little bit of a Donnie Downer experience preparing for the feast last year. I kind of do the look at the weather forecast before we get there. What's it going to be like during the feast? And in Victoria, I guess that time of year it's supposed to kind of dry out and be a bit sunnier prior to the feast. But I looked, and sure enough, it was rain every day. I think there was one day that was maybe some partial sunshine, but it looked rainy and foggy, and I just thought, oh man, it's going to be a little rough. I really wanted to. Don't do that, Andy. Stop it. Okay, I'm going to go and enjoy it for what it is. So I tried to really get in that mindset, and sure enough, several of you that flew into Victoria flew into that day where your plane was actually turned sideways right as you were coming into the runway, and turned at the last second because the crosswinds, and it was just windy and blustery, and very challenging weather brought on. But there was a lot of rain, and there was a lot of fog, and there were a lot of clouds. But we stayed in the city of Victoria. As I mentioned, we were on about the 11th floor of a condo, looking out across the city and across the bay, and we could see on certain days it was cloudy and we couldn't even see the water in the bay, but we looked over here, and raining over here, but we looked over here, there was a little bright spot, and we could see the edge of these mountains to the south. And wow, that's incredible. Next day, that was banked in, and we saw the harbor, and we saw these boat planes landing and seeing that beauty. And then another day we looked around and everything else was socked in, but out here we saw this sight that we hadn't seen, and it was a discovery. What are we going to see today? This is fascinating, the beauty and the rain and the way it cleared out the air. It was just a beautiful, beautiful experience. And the one day that we went to Bouchard Gardens, it was sunny. Bouchard Gardens, we got to see Bouchard Gardens on a sunny day. What a blessing. We didn't expect it. But it was one of those things where we pulled back in terms of having these expectations, minimizing those expectations and experiencing the day as we kept it. Who knows what we're going to see today? Who knows what we might hear from the ministry as we're taught God's word? More insights into God's plan and God's truth. People I might meet, connections I might make with different people. Challenges I might face and joys I might experience. But I'm ready to experience it, and I'm ready to take it all in and apply it to my understanding that God's giving me about His truth, because God wants me to rejoice. The more gratitude, the more thankfulness we have, the more joy we will experience. here's the caveat with expectations. I'm not saying that there is never a reason for expectations, and even Prager mentions that in his book. He makes this statement: children should have every right to, indeed should, expect unconditional love from their parents. It's the birthright of every child to receive such love. We have every right to expect that from our parents in growing up, to see that unconditional love that our parents have for us as we are their children. There are expectations that the Bible says happen and occur. Let's look at a couple. Hebrews 10, verse 26. Hebrews 10, verse 26. In this situation, it's negative, but it is an expectation. It's an expectation for a person who knows God's way of life and chooses not to live it. And not only chooses not to live it, but casts, in a sense, the Son of God underfoot and tramples all over him, who counts the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, the blood that he shed for us, as a common thing, and insults the Spirit of grace. When we go down that path, an individual who has gone down that path and counts it, and in a sense crucifies Christ afresh by saying, this is of no value to me, this is of no meaning, it's a worthless thing. A person who has gotten into that mindset and hates everything that is of God and of his way moves into this sinning willfully. Verse 26, for if we sin willfully after we've received the knowledge of the truth, and it explains, as I just explained, what that willful sinning looks like. Not talking about, I know to do good and I mess up and I sin. I'm not talking about that. It's that mindset of what we just covered. Who does this? There no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but what remains for that individual is a certain fearful expectation of judgment, because it is coming for the individual who does that. God is just, and the person who curses everything that is good, who has knowledge of what that is, who has knowledge of what the sacrifice of Jesus Christ has done for them, who has knowledge of how God's Spirit impacts their lives and changes them into that new creation that is building towards the return of Christ when we'll be fully changed, and casts it all aside and says, it's nothing to me. That person is to have a fearful expectation, because it is coming. It is coming for that individual, that period of judgment, as Scripture indicates, that is talked about at the end of the plan of salvation. Also, we see in Luke 12:40, a statement that is made, something that we can expect, so to speak. Luke 12, verse 40. Verse 40, he says, therefore, as we recognize as God's people, therefore be ready. Luke 12, verse 40, therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. What's he saying there? Expect for the Son of Man to come at a time that you do not expect. We can expect that because he is coming at a time that we do not expect. As Christ says in other places, in another place, that the Father only knows when that is. The Son does not know, but when that time comes, the Son will know and come. But it will come at a time when we do not expect. The promises of God who cannot lie, the God who says, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. I am with you always, even to the end of the age. These promises that God gives us, there are expectations that we can count on with God. I'm not talking about those kinds of expectations. I'm talking about the kinds of expectations that we have over things which we do not have full control. And one other caveat that will say this. I'm not stating to parents either they shouldn't set high standards of behavior for their children to the point where, wow, I'm shocked. I asked my child to come here, and he actually came to me when I called for him. Wow, what an incredible blessing. I'm not saying that it's there is a slight expectation or a standard of behavior that as we work with our children, we expect them to obey. So I'm not talking about those kinds of things, but I'm talking about the kinds of things as Prager mentions in this that I think ties to Scripture. He says, thus, with rare exceptions, the answer to the question, should we have no expectations? Should we not have any expectations at all? Is that where we do not have full control, we should not have expectations. And we do not have full control over most of the important things in life. We don't have full control over our health. We don't have full control over the health of those we love. We don't have full control over how long we and those whom we love, will live, or whether we will be able to get a job we desire. We do, however, have control over some other very important things. We control whether we expend our best effort. We control whether we act decently or not. We have control over our free will. We have moral free will. And given health and ability, we also control the quality of work. I won't turn there, but James 4:13 through 17 talks about that. We don't know what's going to happen between here and there. We can't expect the things that we don't have full control over. We say, as the Lord will, I'll do this. The third point and the final point as we begin to wrap things up here, a key way not only to have high expectations, and secondly, this whole situation of self-handicapping, but this is the more obvious one. But if you want to have a very mediocre and unfulfilling feast, be sure not to make coming before God's presence in the worship of Him on the holy days and every day during the Feast of Tabernacles. Be sure not to make that your overriding central theme of keeping the feast. Don't do it. If you want to have a mediocre feast, be sure you don't do that. And I think we know that. Instead, spend time focusing and dwelling on all the other aspects, but don't spend time focusing on this overriding principle of being there to worship God. If you do that, I can almost guarantee you it's going to create an unfulfilling and a very mediocre feast. Let's turn to Deuteronomy 14. In fact, you don't need to turn there. Let's turn to Nehemiah 8. Nehemiah 8, it's our final scripture. But Deuteronomy 14, verse 23 tells us, and I won't turn there because we know it so well, but he says to do all these things, to take this and take our tithe and go keep the feast, and we do all of this, and we know the phrase because it's talked about nearly every year at the feast. For what reason? What reason do we do all of this? That we may learn to fear the Lord our God always. That is the overriding purpose for us going to the feast. It has been a tremendous success if we leave the feast again with an awe and a reverence of this incredible God that we serve. Fear in terms of reverencing Him to the point of where everything within us is to strive to follow God fully. We go to the feast to worship Him as we sing hymns. We go to the feast to worship Him at His holy convocations. We go to the feast to appear before Him every day as we're taught of His ways, as we're reminded further of the deep truths that we already know, further enlightenments that God gives us of His way of life. Praying for each of the speakers every day, praying for the service itself, praying for the special music, praying that God will bless us in our fellowship, praying that God will help us to meet new people and get to know people better, encourage them and be encouraged by them. Fellowship with the physical and spiritual family, serving at the feast by not just meeting people, but serving in various areas as we're able. And like I say, maybe taking out folks to dinner. But all of it centers on our worship of God. Everything else stems out from that focus of coming before God to worship Him. Yes, we are praying and we are studying, but it is a holy convocation. The males appear before me, God says, appear before me during these times. We bring our families and we keep the feast. We're taught of God's ways. It is the centerpiece of the feast. Everything else, the things that we enjoy, the food we eat, the drinks we have, all of that stem from that central piece. Sometimes I hear stories later of where, folks, especially folks that will go to maybe some of the other places out there, remote areas, different places in Europe and Asia, where I'll hear later where they'll say, well, we were at the feast and we really wanted to see this location. So, in the middle of the feast, we took a couple days, we just took a couple days and went over and saw this. We really wanted to see that. We never had a chance to see this. And yeah, we missed a couple of days of services, but we were able to see this and do this. We got a tape, got to listen to things, got online and listen to. Don't do that, brethren. Don't do that. I hope none of us is planning to do that. That's not what the feast is about. The feast is about coming before God to worship Him, that we may fear Him always. We are appearing before God. He is feasting with us. He is tabernacling with us during that time. It's about all of us being together and experiencing the truths of God, all enjoying the understanding of the plan of God and all of that, and soaking that up and taking that in spiritually and enjoying all the other elements of that as we keep the feast. Let's look finally here at Nehemiah 8. Nehemiah 8, we see this is a passage that we read from time to time. Nehemiah deals with here this part, the wall has been built by this time, and they're coming to the fall holy days to keep the Feast of Trumpets, which leads over 14 days later to the Feast of Tabernacles. And in verse 2 of chapter 8, he makes this statement. As we're looking at Ezra the priest brings the law before the assembly of men and women all on this first day of the seventh month, which is the Feast of Trumpets. So they began reading during this time about the law. They discussed it, and as was talked about in one of our webinars this week, I think this quote was made, verse 8. So they read distinctly from the book in the law of God. So they read the scripture, and then also these various men, as are mentioned in verses 6 and 7, these various men, they read from the book, and they gave the sense, and they helped them understand the reading. So there was expository preaching going on. They were teaching and expounding on the law. What they had then. We've got the law, we've got the entire words of God here to talk about this feast. And Nehemiah, who was the governor, and Ezra, the priest and scribe, and the Levites, who taught the people, said to all the people, "This day is holy to the Lord your God." Of course, this was the Feast of Trumpets. Don't mourn or weep. For all the people were weeping when they heard the words of the law and what they should have been doing that they weren't doing. He said, no, think about this. He said, go your way, eat the fat, eat the choice things, drink the sweet, and send portions to those for whom nothing is prepared. You're hearing God's word, we're taking in of that, where it's being expounded, the plan of God, all of these things, and then go and enjoy and enjoy this abundance. Send portions, so help those give to others, and rejoice greatly, because they understood the words that were declared to them. We go to the feast and we rejoice greatly because God has opened our minds to understand the words that are declared to us. That, as was mentioned in the sermonette, the God of this world has blinded or snatched from people. And then he gets into the discussion of the Feast of Tabernacles in the subsequent verses. But he says finally here in verse 17, so the whole assembly of those who had returned from the captivity made these booths, these temporary shelters, and they sat under the booths. For since the days of Joshua, the son of Nun, until the day of the children of Israel had not done so. And there was very great gladness. Plan neat excursions that your pocketbook can afford. Eat tasty treats that you might not usually get to experience. See the sights. Enjoy a special drink you might not normally get to enjoy. Invite out the needy. Give to others. Get out in nature. Take hikes. Don't take hikes on slippery, rocky cliffs that you will fall from, though. But do it all with a purpose. Do it all with the purpose of celebrating the feast of the Lord, to celebrate the coming change in government, the coming reign of Jesus Christ, to celebrate the future impact of the binding of Satan and his realm, of what that will be like, as was talked about in the sermonette. To celebrate the future healing of the land, celebrate the future change in the mind of the animal realm, celebrate the future change in the hearts of mankind, and celebrate the present togetherness that we as God's people have, that we experience as the body of Christ, as a foretaste of what the world will one day have that opportunity to experience as well in that 1,000-year period. Take it all in, soak it all up, just take it all in. And praise God and thank Him for this experience every day of the feast season. Thank Him for it every day and its amazing meaning as God has given us this understanding. The joy of the Lord will remain your strength as you and I do that. And this year's feast season will not be mediocre, and this year's feast season will not be unfulfilling.